Out of that remarkably revealing interview with White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. The Vanity Fair piece titled Susie Wiles, J.D. Vance and the Junkyard Dogs, the White House Chief of Staff on Trump's second term, is a series of interviews with Susie Wiles, who speaks candidly about her boss and his administration. The president's top advisor, who he has referred to at times as Susie Trump, served as Trump's 2024 presidential campaign manager and was largely credited with his successful bid for a second term. The first woman to serve as White House Chief of Staff did not hold back when asked about President Trump targeting perceived political enemies. She told Vanity Fair, quote, "I don't think he wakes up thinking about retribution, but when there's an opportunity, he will go for it." She also described President Trump, who does not drink, as having an alcoholic's personality, also commenting on members of the president's cabinet, referring to Vice President J.D. Vance as a conspiracy theorist for a decade. The president defending Wiles' comments, telling the New York Times, or the New York Post, rather, in an interview that he does have a possessive and addictive type personality, adding, quote, "I'm fortunate I'm not a drinker." And Wiles harshly criticizing the publication on X, calling the report a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. We are joined now by the reporter behind that headline-making piece, Vanity Fair's Chris Whipple. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on Top Story. I mean, let's just start with how this came to be. I mean, this is an administration that often tends to prioritize speaking with quote-unquote friendly outlets, friendly reporters or media figures. How did you get this access, and how many times did you talk to Susie?
Well, not only that, but as you well know, Susie Wiles is famous for being under the radar, off camera, rarely giving interviews. So it was really a remarkable experience. It began in January, almost a year ago, that we began to talk. We talked about the campaign that she had just led for President Trump, that against all odds campaign. Quickly became apparent to me that she really wanted to talk about Trump 2.0, the second term. And so we talked about that. And shortly thereafter, I told her that Vanity Fair wanted to publish the piece. She was all in from the get-go. And everything, nearly everything was on the record, except when we explicitly agreed otherwise. And it's just remarkable how candid and kind of unscripted she was.
I mean, it is the thing everyone is talking about because there is so much there. It's also so rare to hear from her, as you said. I want to play a little bit of what we heard from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt when she was asked yesterday about this interview, and then we'll get your reaction on the other side.
Sure.
Let's listen.
This is, unfortunately, another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present.
What do you make of that and the reaction?
Well, you know, what's notable about that is what she didn't say. Neither she nor the White House nor Susie Wiles has challenged a single statement, a single assertion or quotation in the piece. It's a 9,500-word piece full of interesting material, behind closed doors material. And frankly, I think there's actually lots of positive things about Susie Wiles that I reported on. This is a very different White House from Trump 1.0. It's a better run White House. But look, there are a lot of crises, and we talked about all of them, from the blanket pardon of the January 6th insurrectionist, which Susie Wiles tried to tap the brakes on, all the way to revenge and retribution and the prosecution of his political enemies, and especially Letitia James. And what was really remarkable is that Susie Wiles conceded that that was a case of retribution, and it's practically a get-out-of-jail-free card for Letitia James's attorneys. If you ask me, I'm not an attorney, but...
You mentioned that they haven't criticized exactly what was said. They keep saying that the context is missing or that it is disingenuous. When you hear comments like that, and we've heard repeatedly, even Susie Wiles has said it's missing context. Is there more context? I mean, are there audio tapes or transcripts you would consider releasing?
Here's what I would say to young reporters who are just starting to cover the White House. When you start hearing words like context and disingenuous and framing, you know that you've done your job. What it means is that they can't talk about any mistakes. What it means is that they know that the piece is accurate. And as I say, it was 9,500 words, plenty of context galore.
Mm-hmm. So is there a world where you would release I assume there's audio recordings of some of the on-the-record interviews, as most journalists have. Would you consider releasing those just to say, take it off the table?
Well, that's above my pay grade. I mean, that wouldn't be my decision. But no, ordinarily, as you well know, as a reporter, you wouldn't release your raw notes, which is what the tapes are.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, when you think about some of the quotes we didn't even touch on, some of the comments she made about Venezuela, right? Saying that Trump wants to keep pressure on President Maduro. She told you, quote, he wants to keep on blowing up boats until Maduro cries uncle. Given the news we saw last night and the announcement of this blockade, is there context in that or just information that you are now looking at the totality of what you've reported and saying, oh, this is extra relevant? What should we make of those comments in conjunction with the activity we're seeing in Venezuela?
Well, really remarkable comments and remarkably candid on her part to concede that while the official policy so far has been we're blowing up these boats to stop drugs from reaching U.S. shores, that in fact it seems to be regime change. What does that mean? Blowing up boats until Maduro cries uncle. Sounds like regime change to me. The other thing she said that was remarkable is that if and when Trump decides to strike land targets in Venezuela, he would need to go to Congress for a declaration of war. Now, I doubt that Donald Trump was pleased to hear that declaration, because he seems to have a very different point of view when it comes to executive power.
Some people have taken issue with the photos that were included in this piece. I'll put up a post from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He said this on X: it's obvious to most people that Vanity Fair deliberately manipulated pictures and reported statements without context to try and make the White House team look bad. I mean, these photos, they were taken by a photographer named Christopher Anderson. And when I went back and looked at his work, this does seem to be like his signature style, from like Margot Robbie to Pharrell Williams. He gets really close up often.
He does. He does get close up, and the key here is that nothing was done. Everybody was fully informed about what was going on here. Not only that the conversations were on the record, but they knew who the photographer was. They even reviewed his portfolio before he went to the White House for Vanity Fair. And that's probably all I should say about it, because my job is to report and write. You'd really have to ask the editors about that.
But to your knowledge, those photos were not, quote unquote, manipulated.
No. I mean, it's silly, the whole idea. If you look at his portfolio, this is what he does. He's a photojournalist who often does very revealing close-ups.
Chris Whipple, thank you so much. An extraordinary piece of journalism. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.